Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us for the MFTF 2.5.0 release demo. A lot of really cool stuff in this release. A lot of quality of life stuff that people have been asking for a while. And we're more than happy to be able to enhance the MFTF using experience by doing releases like this, you know? So, yeah, let's just go ahead and just dive right on in. Starting off under traceability, we have a couple of Allure enhancements, right? Mostly regarding test artifacts. So around data assertions, we now include request body and request data. URL assertions or actions, we include the assertion expected and actual, so you can see exactly what the URL was and what it was expecting. And the make screenshot action now ties a screenshot directly to the make screenshot action, right? As opposed to, so you can take screenshots in the middle of a build or something like that, and then compare take a look at the Magento state at that point if there's any troubleshooting that needs to be done. I'll go ahead and show real quick what that looks like. I have a couple of tests set up here. An Allure attachments test. Let me double check that I don't have my Magento VP. I'm going to go and clean this off just so it's a little faster. So I'm going to do bin MFTF run test Allure attachments. And you'll see the test is pretty simple. It just goes to my Magento local URL. It sees that in current URL Magento exists, and then we'll be able to see that in the test in the Allure report. It creates a default category. Now it's going to fail because I don't have the Magento VP. How silly. I'm just going to skip generation this time around. It creates the default category, and then it makes a screenshot just with the step key of screenshot. One thing that's worth noting while I wait for generation here, or for parsing, we created hooks for adding these kinds of artifacts in the Allure report. So if for some reason somebody is watching this and they see, hey, I know that for a fact that I would really like to have this artifact attached to this action, it's incredibly easy to make use of that hook, and PRs are more than welcome if you guys know that there's certain actions that you think could use an enhancement like this. But take a look. Oh boy. Now, I'm going to cancel that because I have a dirty environment here in my output folder. But let's try that again. No, not that. Try running the test again. One of the things that you may notice is that the -k flag is also parsing tests. So that's due to another enhancement that I'll be covering later on about running tests and the run test command. But I'll touch again on that whenever that comes around. There we go now. Perfect, much better. Lower attachments here. I'll make this a little bigger just so it's the center of the screen. Go to the URL, see current URL. This comparison is now going to be included into pretty much all of the URL actions, like seeing current URL, don't see current URL, the regex related actions and stuff like that. So that'll be helpful for debugging. The request body and request data are now going to be a part of every single create data call. So you can see what exactly the framework decided to send to the Magento instance and exactly what the Magento instance returned with. This right here is going to be incredibly useful for if you're not 100% sure what the JSON or the REST response is from Magento, and you're not 100% sure how to I don't know, make use of these things like parent ID, children, etc. So that should be very useful for debugging. And lastly, the screenshot right here. It's just a screenshot of my front end. There's a bunch of categories and stuff like that created as a result of testing some other stuff. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. And again, the hook is incredibly easy to use. If you guys want to make PRs for other actions, by all means. Next up, we have under modularity, we have a new command, MFTF run manifest, and then the full path to the manifest. So the gist of this command is that it's supposed to run the test manifest as generated via generate tests, which includes stuff like the config parallel, which we use for parallelization internally. You can see right here, mainly useful for system integrations to mimic internal build workflow without individual iteration. So what does that mean? That means that bin MFTF generate tests with a config parallel generates a bunch of groups under a groups directory inside generated, right? Each one of these groups contains a line, like a -g secure storefront URL suite, that's passed directly to Codeception. If you were to be, prior to this enhancement, if you were wanting to be using all of these group files, you would have to iterate inside this groups folder, each of the individual group.txt files, read what's inside it. Sometimes it's one -g line, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's a bunch of individual test paths, and you would have to do like codesap run this, codesap run this, codesap run this, essentially. What this does is it does that all automatically internally within MFTF. So if you were wanting to be parallelizing stuff in CI builds, you could just use bin MFTF run manifest and then this right here and then that one, which makes it a much easier iteration loop and a lot less stuff for you guys to have to configure. This bullet point right here, it's compatible with run failed. Run failed uses Codeception test run artifacts to denote which test failed in a previous command. I don't know if you've ever noticed in the output folder, if you ever run a test that fails, there is a failed file that just contains the name of the test. That's really that's the crux of the run failed command that is used alongside run manifest. So the idea is you do run manifest once, and then it runs all of the tests. It maintains the integrity of that failed file, and then you can just do MFTF run failed to do a retry essentially. And this command also maintains the integrity of that file. So then you can retry as many times as you want. You can just iterate over run failed in your own builds if there are still failures. So let me just go ahead and show you real quick how to make use of that on a local environment, and it should be pretty obvious as to how to integrate it into a CI/CD environment, right? So I have, I'm gonna make sure that this is commented out. Cool. So I'm gonna do bin mftf generate tests --config parallel. Might take a little bit just because it's parsing and generating pretty much the entirety of Magento 2 CE while BlueJeans is running, but it doesn't seem to be having that hard of a time. These deprecation warnings are just from my test stuff here for this demo. Pretty sure CE is mostly clean of deprecation warnings as of right now. Generate test command run. Cool. I'm going to make sure this is synchronized, just to make sure that there's not any weird cached stuff. Okay, we're good. So yeah, like I said before, there's a ton of group files, all of which contains these individual lines, like -g, suite 1, suite 2, PayPal suite. But then you get to files like this, which are a ton of individual lines, which look ugly because they're not necessarily supposed to be human readable. It's more for use for iteration. But just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to copy the path of this file right here. Do bin mftf run manifest, the full path. Run it, and you will see that 12 tests start to run. And it's going to start executing the first test, I think, in a second, or maybe it already did. I'm going to look into my my machine here, wait for the browser to open. Yep. And then it's going to be starting to run the storefront verify, secure URL redirect tests and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's how I make use of that. I'm just going to kill this so that we don't sit here and watch 12 tests running and consecutive. This is the first step towards making a lot of the framework-specific improvements to help everybody mimic internal build workflow and be able to use MFTF very easily in your pipeline. Stuff that's mostly in the community. Internal people might not see necessarily the use for this because you might not really need the use for it, but there you go. Moving on, still under modularity, there have been enhancements introduced to the MFTF run test command. Enhancement number 1 right here, implicit suite generation. As you probably know now, if you're trying to run a test that exists within a suite, it'll complain that the test needs to be referenced within a suite configuration. Well, it's not really going to happen anymore. So if a test exists in multiple suites, it will generate them in all suite contexts. And we have a follow-up enhancement planned for being able to narrow that down. I'll show you what the implications of this line right here are right now. I have a test 1. I'm going to look inside my suite that I came up with here. So I have suite 1 contains tests 1, 2, and 3, right? So given that, I'm going to do bin mftf run test 1. I'm going to do -r just so I can clean up my generated folder. And I'm going to comment out Magento BP just so we have a very small test base to work with. So this is nice and fast. So there you go. As you see, test one is it's executing the suite before and the suite after. I just did a Magento list command just so we can have some nice output. The test itself just says hello world. It's a pretty simple test. But as you can see, the test existed in this suite, but it does not exist in any other suites, right? So that was a pretty simple use case, just get in and get out. So we're going to go instead run test 3 right now. It exists in suite 1 as well as suite 2, right? And you will see that two versions of this test are going to be run. It's going to be test 1 under group 1, or the suite 1, right? And then immediately following this, it's going to execute it under suite 2. So the reasoning for this is because there's no necessarily way for us to know as of right now what context you want to run this in. But we will be figuring something out in that follow-up release, probably in 2.5.1, for you guys to be able to use that. In the meantime, you can always just go into the generated folder. If you just do generate test as well. Generate test was also enhanced with this. You'll see that the generated folder contains both of those. You can always just delete it. And then just do run test -k, I believe, would work. No test executed in the first suite, but test 3 is executed in suite number 2 right here. So that's the first of the enhancements to run test. The second one is that the specific tests are run regardless of what is generated. Again, as some of you might already know, if you just generate the entire test suite, pretty much everything that's in CE, and you want to run individual tests, you would probably have to run -r due to some artifacting of how suites are generated. You would have to clean up the generated directory to run exactly what you want. So now you can just generate once and run several tests using -k to skip generation, just to skip some of that lengthy time of clearing and then regenerating. So to show that, I'm just going to generate everything that I have, just with a force flag here. It's not too big. I think there's only a couple of my demo tests here, and then a suite 1 and a suite 2. So say I want to run just this data test. I can do bin MFTF run test data test, then -k to skip generation. It'll still ping the Magento instance to figure out what tests are generated and what tests are available, but you can see that it didn't run everything. It just ran my data test here. Again, another nice convenience feature just for quality of life and saving some time with generation and stuff like that. Oh, one thing that I did not include into this, demo, there was anything really to show off, but it's something to talk about, and that's in the changelog, would be that we made some improvements to just overall test generation performance. We did some testing after doing some refactoring, and test generation performance should be somewhere around 15% faster. Thank you, Reese, for coming up with those metrics. We have further refactoring tasks just to make generation even faster. But yeah, that's definitely on the radar for us. So moving on, maintainability. We added a --allow-skipped flag. It fully generates a test body even if the skip flag is enabled. As some of you may know, if you skip a test, it's not that the test is not going to be generated. It's that the test is generated with a shell outline that says, hey, this test is skipped due to some reason. That's used very much internally just so that we don't have red tests and builds all the time. So this allow skip flag applies to all generate and then run commands as well. So if for some reason you want to try to run a skipped test just to make sure that it's still failing, or if you want to be able to replicate whatever bug that was found via automation, you're able to do so pretty easily. So I'm just going to demonstrate that again as well here real quick. Let's just do this Allure attachments test. I'm just going to add some annotations here. MQE-123. So let's just go and run this test. I did not add in the --allow skip flag, right? So you'll see that the test just says, test is red, test is skipped due to the following issues. That's behavior as is, right? So -- allow skipped. And here you'll see that it's actually performing all the test steps in the test. Oh, and then it failed because I don't have my my env linked up correctly, right? So there you go. That's a perfect example. So you can see a test that is skipped. You can run it now pretty easily. And I believe finally the last thing that I have to demo. Go ahead.
Can you just show just running skip test only?
Skip the tests only? What do you mean?
So it was a request to just run skip tests only.
Oh, just to
Yeah.
generate only skip tests?
Yeah.
I don't think that was part of the original.
Was it? Okay.
It was not. There's something following up for that, for figuring out how to basically generate only skipped tests. But yeah, no, this one was just for being able to run them at all. I think the idea is for local development and local debugging.
Yeah.
Before seeing the real need and use case for a full build around that.
And in CI/CD, it doesn't make sense currently to run the tests because they will affect groups.
Also true.
Yeah, so we need to run them with already existing running tests.
Mm-hmm. Cool. But yeah, lastly, the last thing that I have to show here, under customizability, entity data can now be referenced in other entities, right? Just using the normal double curly braces entity.data notation. You can see just here 1, 2, 3 little panels of we have entity 1, entity 2, referencing the title of the first one. In a comment, I'm just referencing the title of the first one, and then you can see in the test that it references this right here. All this is done during test runtime, I believe. Well, no, it isn't. Depends, actually. Yes. Either way, let's just go ahead and run this data test real quick. MFTF, run test, data test. I have all of the entities that I showed you guys in the slide set up in my local. All those things blazingly fast. But as you can see in my test up here, entity 2, first title, and then it references the first entity. A lot of different use cases for this. One word of caution, since there are so many different ways of customizing data and referencing other things, whether or not you override it in the middle of a test or whether or not you extend it, this is essentially one additional vector for that. So yeah, do check out DevDocs on extending, in case extending might actually solve your use case better than referencing the data directly. It's useful mostly for like whenever it's two types of data that aren't even necessarily linked by product type, right?
It's mostly useful for if you try and, let's say, we have an entity, create an admin user, and we need to specify a current admin user password.
Okay.
This password is coming from env file, so to reference this env file, we should be able to reference data entities because we treat env file as a simple data entity. So that's the initial idea why we wanted to make this possible. Also, the other idea was to make possible use credentials in data entities. So we want to eliminate hard-coded keys, password, everything from data entities and move them to credential storage. So that's also was a part of this to make able use credentials data entity. And as a feature out of this, we were able to specify to make possible reference and other simple data entities we create.
That's true. Yeah, the mechanisms in the framework behind creds and env, it's not exactly a giant leap in logic to be able to reference other pieces of data. Nice. Makes sense. I'm glad I asked. Cool. Well, that's slide 6 out of 6. That's all of the stuff that we have to demo. The changelog is pretty extensive. There's a bunch of other bugs and stuff like that we didn't really mention in here. So if you want to see what's new with 2.5.0, please do check it out. Do we have any questions from anybody watching? Oh, no, not yet. Not yet. It's not fully baked.
But it's working on the Mac.
Yes, it is.
Let's have rough word about it.
Okay, fair enough. One of the things that I didn't include in this demo, mostly because it's not fully working internally along with builds and stuff like that, so we didn't want people started to jump in too much into it. But for everybody that's here and can take a bit of nuance, so we implemented the initial, essentially the start of the MFTF and Vault integration, which is what does that mean? That means that your creds right now, your credentials file can only be used locally. The idea is that in the future, you're going to be able to store your credentials via Vault, as well as our internal Vault, and then reference them in your tests, such that there's essentially a canonical version of an API key you need for your extensions integration, and then you can reference that in the tests.
Yes. So
yeah.
Let me add to it more.
Please.
As you may know, we're looking forward to run our MFTF tests on Marketplace at some point of time, and we know that most of the extensions working with third-party systems, and to make this test runnable and make it possible to run, we need to store this sandbox credential somewhere. And our goal was, when you will submit your credentials for your sandbox account, we want to keep them stored secretly so no one can get them and mess up with your sandbox account. So that was the initial idea why we wanted to make this integration with Vault. Currently, we made the first iteration of integration. We included this into MFTF. MFTF is able from now on to communicate with Vault, get all of the credentials we need, and pass them through the test. So we can use it in MFTF. The next steps will be upgrade our infrastructure, upgrade EQP system to provide this Vault instances with your secure credentials. So that's a rough explanation. What is this?
Yeah, that's a good explanation. This stuff is all working with a local Vault instance, and even a non-local Vault instance. If somebody's particularly curious and wants to give it a shot, you can just get Vault via Brew, I'm pretty sure, set up a local dev environment, and then if you take a look at the env.example, we introduced some new env settings right here for setting the Vault address and the Vault base path. Mm-hmm. These are the defaults that Vault comes with. So if you were to copy both of these over from the framework and then just paste them over into your own .env file, you'd be able to replicate that. You can see in the .credentials here, I have extension API key right here. This is essentially the notation that we're going to be expecting. It's like whatever the extension organization is, whatever it is that you're trying to reference, and then the secret key. Yeah, one more thing to note about this Vault stuff. We'll probably cover it again once the implementation is all fully baked and everybody's going to start being able to make use of it. That you can have the credential storage mechanism is always going to prefer local storage right here. So I have this .credentials. If I have everything in my MFTF set up to communicate with the whatever will be the official MFTF Vault, where the canonical API keys are. If for some reason in my local development I want to point myself at a different sandbox, if you define it locally here in your credentials, it's going to prefer this over whatever is in Vault. And yeah, I think that about covers it on a very high level.
Yes.
Good stuff, good stuff. Does anybody have any questions at all? Go ahead and stop sharing on my screen because I can't see the chat while I'm sharing my screen. Not seeing any questions. So, thank you everybody for joining us for 2.5.0. A copy of this is going to be available internally, and then Alex is going to make it available externally as well. And we can make a copy of the PowerPoint also available for everybody. Thanks everybody for joining.
If you have any questions, join MFTF Slack channel and ask them.
As usual.
Yep.
Good stuff. Thanks everybody.